Welcome to Factfinder Investigates. I'm Dylan Domingue. We have new developments this week into the deadly mid-air collision involving Flight 5342. The Department of Transportation's Inspector General now opening an investigation looking into the FAA's handling and management of the airspace around Reagan National Airport. It's focused on why some aircraft were allowed to fly without ADS-B technology. That includes the crash of Flight 5342 that killed 67 people back in January. In June, lawmakers, including Senator Jerry Moran, called on the Inspector General to conduct an audit. The Army has not opened their own investigation just yet. And an attorney representing a dozen families of victims from the Flight 5342 tragedy says the first known lawsuit against the federal government is expected to be filed next month. Robert Clifford, an attorney with Chicago-based law office, says the lawsuits are aimed at holding the FAA and the Army responsible. Clifford attended the NTSB investigative hearing last week that looked into the crash and said it is clear that the FAA knew for years of the dangerous airspace around DCA and did not take enough safety measures. And the Army also knew that they were flying in a congested area without critical flight tracking data turned on. Attorneys expect this case to be resolved by settlement or trial, but Clifford says there are challenges when suing the government, and what the families are really looking for is accountability.
The word that comes to mind, the phrase that comes to mind is they're bullies. They think, hey, we're the government, don't mess with us. Well, we've been, lawyers like me and the others, we're accustomed to that. And we know that we represent people who have suffered needless, senseless, preventable harms. And they're entitled to accountability.
Clifford believes the lawsuits will be filed in Washington, D.C., but it could take years for settlements to be reached with each of the families. And coming up this week, we will air my sit-down interview with Gwen Duggins. That's the mother of Kia Duggins, who was one of the 67 people that was killed in the mid-air collision. Kia was just 30 years old. She attended Wichita State University and studied law at Harvard before being hired as a civil rights attorney in Washington, D.C. Kia was flying back home after visiting her mom here in Wichita, who had been recovering from surgery. Gwen Duggins remembers the last time she spoke with her daughter and shared that it is a moment that she has held on to for the last 6 months.
I was released from the hospital the morning of the crash. My husband was preparing to take Kia to the airport, and she came in and she was like, "Mom, I'm going to leave you with a little dance." And she did this little dance, and her sister was like, "Is that all you got?" And so, of course, she danced a lot harder and gave me a hug and gave me a kiss and said, "I'll see you later, Mom." And, I never in my wildest dreams would have imagined that that would be our last earthly interaction.
It was an emotional and powerful interview, and we will share more from that talk with Gwen Duggins coming up Thursday, August 14th on KWCH and on the KSCW.
That one time is when he tried that, fondling me while I was sleeping.
We are continuing our investigation into sexual abuse allegations made against Bodie Weiss, a former student ministries director at Wichita's Eastminster Church. You just heard from Robert Golden, who says he is a victim of Bodie Weiss. Golden telling us his abuse came before Weiss worked at Eastminster, and he tried to warn the church about it. But he says he wasn't the only victim. He knows a dozen other men with similar stories. Now, Bodie Weiss died back in 2020, and while Golden is now in his 60s, he still believes that former Eastminster staff didn't take his story seriously and continued to let Bodie work with kids.
I'm 61. I'm still affected by this.
Robert Golden says it took time, even 45 years later, to realize the inappropriate sexual touching that Bodie Weiss did to him as a teenager.
So I never thought anything about him always wanting to hug, always wanting to spend alone time.
Was this just with young boys, or was this kind of with everybody?
Just boys.
Golden says at the time, Bodie was in college, but would come back to the church to preach. During that time, Golden says he and several boys shared their concerns about Bodie with the pastor at the church.
He would talk to each one of us one by one. He pretty much said nothing to see here, and that was that.
Following that, Golden says for 25 years he only told his friends what happened with Bodie. That was until 2005, when while driving with his best friend, Bodie's name was brought up. They searched him and found he had been hired by Wichita's Eastminster and had been working as the student ministries director for 16 years. Did it surprise you that he was still working for our church?
No, because even though when I was a kid, I didn't know any better. As an adult, I know how these guys operate. That's a perfect place for these guys to go and do what they do.
That's when Golden called the pastor at Eastminster at the time.
And I told him about his MO, at least the way as I saw it. What about the kids, the other kids, the other boys at the church? And I said, I have a couple of them here. He said, well, we'll look into it, but we haven't heard anything like that.
However, at that time, Eastminster did in fact know about one sexual harassment allegation made against Bodie 5 years earlier while working at the church. In this letter sent in June to its congregation, Eastminster admits that the first allegation against Bodie Weiss came in 2000. The letter also confirms in 2005, 2 men from Pennsylvania reported Bodie's inappropriate behavior. While the church says they did open an investigation, the allegations could not be substantiated, and Bodie continued to work at Eastminster until 2006.
He was really good. He had found a way to, to pull the wool over everybody's eyes.
Last summer, Eastminster hired Factfinding Ministry, a third-party investigative team, after more sexual abuse allegations against Bodie were brought to light. That group found there to be 23 victims of abuse. While the church acknowledged that there was systemic failure in protecting kids against Bodie, Golden says he and others tried to warn the church.
I know how it's affected me, and at least 23 people, how it's affected them. And for the church to just say, my bad, and just move on, it does not seem right to me. Especially when I tried, I guess several people tried to give them a heads up.
And new this week, Eastminster responding directly to our questions for the first time. We asked about Golden's allegations. The church says when Golden called in 2005, he spoke with the interim pastor, who had only been there a year. While some staff at Eastminster did know the other sexual abuse allegation that was made 5 years earlier, the pastor did not, and only shared Golden's allegation with a limited group of personnel at Eastminster. The church does stand by their findings that Golden's allegations could not be substantiated. Eastminster also believes that their former staff placed too much trust in Bodie Weiss because of the apparent success of the student ministries program while he was in charge there.
They just went door to door to evacuate everybody.
So to come on Factfinder Investigates, a look at the risk of explosions linked to the rush to get broadband across America. We investigate how work to bring service across the country may be contributing to more gas lines being hit.